Let's dive into this history. Brother of fire. The forges of Suldar never slept. Deep beneath the mountain stone skin, they burned in endless rhythm, hammering metal into shape for a war none of the slaves would ever see. The flames hissed like serpents. Iron rang like bells from the underworld. Smoke crawled between ribs and silence was treated like treason. It was night, though no stars shone here. Night above, perhaps, but not here, where ash was snow and fire was God. And within this roaring underworld, among soot-covered arms and skin cracked from heat, a man stood silent. His name, as far as anyone knew, was No One. He had been brought in 2 days ago, tossed into the forge lines with no explanation, no chains, no past. His hair was the color of burnt copper. His eyes dark but alert, watching not the guards nor the flames, but the breath of the furnace. It was said he didn't blink when sparks landed on his skin. It was said he listened to the fire. New blood? Rasped Nad, the old smith who hadn't swung a hammer in years, but still haunted the edges of the forge halls, offering advice no one asked for. Not blood, said one of the younger boys. Something else. Nad squinted at the newcomer from the shadows. You smell of copper, he muttered under his breath. And copper doesn't lie. That night, Forge 7 refused to die. Even with its fuel gone, the flames roared brighter, hungrier. It licked at the stone with unnatural greed, and none of the guards could explain it. The apprentices avoided it. Even the bellowsman, a brute of a slave named Rorn, refused to go near. They said the fire inside wasn't red. It was gold. It was listening. Speak, stranger, barked Overseer Vehen, the night warden. His whip was as fast as his suspicion. Why do you stare at the flames like they owe you something? The newcomer said nothing. Vehen narrowed his eyes. Silence is guilt. He raised the whip. But Nad stepped forward, with more courage than bones. I'll speak for him, he said, voice cracking like old leather. He's no threat. Just cracked from the heat. Like the rest of us. Vehen sneered but didn't strike. For now. That night, long after the last shift clanged to a halt and the slaves collapsed into stone corners to sleep, the man moved. He walked to Forge 7. No torches. No tools. Just hands. He placed his palms on the stone lip of the furnace. The heat should have blistered them. But the flames curved toward him like greeting an old friend. For a breathless moment, they shimmered, and within that golden shimmer, something shifted. A spark leapt up, small, bright, almost joyful. It kissed his skin. And vanished. He stepped back, chest rising. I was flame, he whispered to the dark. Now only memory. But memory, he added, can still burn. At dawn, when the bell rang to rouse the forge lines, something odd happened. A hammer, one used by a scrawny boy on the morning line, melted in his grip. Not broke. Not shattered. Melted. As if the metal had remembered something it refused to become. A guard shouted. The boy cried. The stranger watched. And said nothing. Not yet. Later, in a rusted corner, the man found a scrap of bronze. A piece of something ancient. Worn but not broken. He rubbed it with his sleeve, and words emerged. Intar. He stared at it for a long time. Then tucked it away. Nad appeared behind him. You spoke last night, the old man said softly. Not with words. But the forge told me. Intar, for now, the name fit, looked toward Forge 7. I came back, he murmured. Not as a god. As consequence. Nad nodded, not pretending to understand. Just knowing he should. Above them, on the upper floors where only guards and nobles walked, the staff of King Ilaran burned with a strange heat. At its heart, a crystal dug from the ruins of an old temple, still pulsing. Below, one of the workers whispered that the fire had stolen his voice. But in truth, he had simply forgotten how to use it. For now, in the darkness, fire remembered more than any man. And it had begun to listen again. They called it the Hall of Tempering. Every weapon forged in Suldar passed through it, tested by hammer, fire, and frost. Blades were struck, bent, scorched, cooled. Those that held served kings. Those that cracked fed the slag pits. But today, the metal remembered something. And it began to refuse. It started small. A dagger, cooled properly, snapped in half with a sound like a sigh. A spear tip, forged from the hardest ore, bloomed open at the first strike, like a flower made of shame. Then a sword. A perfect sword. Balanced. Polished. Sharpened. It simply began to hum. Not vibrate. Not shake. Hum. Soft. Clear. Almost like singing. The guards drew back. The smith testing it dropped it immediately. The metal didn't fall with a clatter, it rang, long and hollow. Then split down the center, clean and quiet. A silence spread through the hall like ash. In the far corner of the lower forge, Intar stood by furnace 7. Not forging. Not speaking. Just there. Present. And the fire in the forge, which should have faded by then, still danced. Mira watched from above. She often did, unseen, observing through the grates in the walls or from the scaffolds. Daughter of Chief Smithyham, she knew how to listen more than how to hammer. She had grown up among flame and steel, but something in this silence unnerved her. The slaves looked shaken. Even the guards began to whisper. "Metal doesn't bend like that," said one. "It's curse," muttered another. "Or someone's playing with the old ways." She descended the stairs. Walked slowly past benches, bellows, racks of broken blades. Then, behind a shelf of cooling molds, she found it, an old casting frame. Heavy. Half buried in soot. A shape pressed into its heart, the mark of a god long forgotten. 3 concentric flames. The symbol of Varen, the fire forger, the breaker of unworthy steel. "Who used this?" Mira asked aloud. No one answered. Because no one knew. Up above, in the royal tower, King Ilaren stared at the broken remains of a ceremonial blade laid before him. "The ore?" he asked. "Pure," Yehem said, sweat beading on his brow. "The aloe?" "Balanced." But, they crack, Majesty. They shiver. Some scream." "Scream?" Ilaren repeated, voice low and dangerous. The old smith swallowed. "Only once. And only one of the slaves heard it." "Then kill that slave," the king said, rising. "And every blade made near him." "But if a god moves against me," the king growled, eyes burning with pride, "I will strike the sky itself. Let the heavens come. We have fire too." In the test yard, a veteran had arrived. Sullen. Long scars on his cheeks. Arms built from war. He had come to test the new fire lances, weapons meant to hurl flame with steel mouths. He had trained with real monsters. He did not believe in haunted forges. Until the blade handed to him split apart in his hand before he struck a single blow. He stared at the metal. Then at the weapon master. Then said only, "Make peace with something. Anything." Back in the forge, late at night, Intar stood alone again. The others slept, what sleep they could find between beatings and heat. Furnace 7 still glowed. He placed a dull, failed sword on the anvil. Spoke softly. "You obey fear. But fear forgets its shape. You need something stronger." He pressed a hand to the blade. The metal whined. Then bent. Not cracked. Not melted. Bent. Like it listened. He dropped the sword into the cooling trough. It did not sizzle. It dissolved. The water barely steamed. Nearby, one young slave clutched his head. "I heard it," he said. "The sword. It screamed. Not pain. Not anger. Just remembered something." Mira found fingerprints the next morning, inside a mold that hadn't been used in years. Deep burned in. Too deep for flesh. Too precise for accident. She touched the mark. It was still warm. Above, the king summoned his priests. Below, the flames began to whisper old names. The old forge hall had no name. It lay beneath the eastern ventways, past a corridor of broken carts and twisted hooks. A place forgotten by time, buried beneath soot and silence. The torches here had long since died. No slave was sent there. No guard cared to check. But the air still breathed heat, slow, deep, like coals refusing to die. And tonight, Intar walked there barefoot. His steps left no echo, only a soft crunch of grit. The walls dripped with blackened memory. Rusted molds lined the shelves, each one a grave to a weapon that was never born. Smoke clung to the ceiling, even though no fire had burned here in years. Behind him, Mira followed. Quiet, careful, half in fear. She'd seen him, 2 nights ago, place his bare hand into the edge of Furnace 7. She'd watched the flames reach for him, not to devour, but to greet. She hadn't told her father. Yet. The air grew warmer as they moved deeper. Intar stopped before a stone slab, half buried in slag. He brushed it clean with his sleeve. Beneath the ash, bronze gleamed. Not polished, but persistent. Letters. Old. Crude. INTAR. Then, a harsh mark through them. As if the world itself had tried to erase it. Mira stepped beside him, reading aloud. This name. It's in the stories. A god of the forge. The one who gave fire to men, then took it away. Intar didn't look at her. He stared at the name. I didn't take it, he said, voice low, rough with memory. I warned. But you all thought memory was weaker than power. He turned to her slowly. I am Intar. Or what remains of him. I am fire without a throne. A name burned out of every hymn. But not out of the forge. Myra's mouth went dry. Why now? Intar looked down at his hands. Because you're shaping death when you could be shaping bread. In the upper halls, King Ilarian's decree had been signed. Anyone impeding the armory will hang by morning. But down here, far from the law, something older had stirred. Mira stepped back, eyes wide. Intar stepped forward. He reached toward the slab again, pressed his fingers gently into the bronze letters. Where his touch met the metal, a soft red glow bloomed. The name glowed. No flames. No fury. Just heat. Steady. Alive. And in that moment, Mira saw it clearly. The fire around him never smoked. Never coughed or burned too fast. It breathed. Like it remembered how to wait. From the corner, footsteps echoed. A figure stood at the threshold. Sullen. The war-hardened veteran, helmet in hand, eyes hollow with too many seen deaths. He looked at Intar. You walk on coals, he said. You bend blades without a hammer. You breathe flame. You want me to believe you're not a god? No, Intar replied. I want you to remember that fire came first to warm your bread, not to burn your enemies. Solon lifted the helmet he carried, old, dented, useless now, and sat down beside the slab. Silently, he took out a sharp nail and began to carve. Not a symbol of war, but a tree. A simple line of roots, trunk, and 3 branches. Mira knelt beside him. Do you believe him? She asked. Solon didn't stop carving. I believe the swords broke for a reason. And the fire's asking questions we forgot how to answer. Up above, thunder rolled. But here, underground, only a strange warmth lingered. That night, in the upper halls, a slave claimed to have seen the fire bow to a man. Another claimed he watched Intar place a melted blade into water, and the water turned gold. Yet another ran into the night screaming, convinced the forge would swallow them all. An omen, they whispered. An ending. But Mira stayed. And as Intar rose from the stone, she noticed something else. In the ash beneath his heel, there was no footprint. Only heat. The Hall of Flame had no windows. It didn't need them. Perched at the highest point of the citadel of Ilarion, it opened not to the sky but to legend. 7 torches lined the chamber, each set into a brass cradle carved with lions, serpents, and wolves. Their flames had not died since the day of Ilarion's coronation. That was the tale. But now one was gone. The sixth torch had guttered in the night. No wind. No hands. No reason. Just darkness, sitting where once there was fire. Ilarion stood before it in silence, hands clasped behind his back. His robes of obsidian velvet rustled as he turned to his advisor. "I want to hear it," he said, voice like cooled steel. Eremos, the old chamberlain, hesitated. "The reports are unclear, sire. But there are whispers. In the lower furnaces." "Of what?" "Of metal that bends itself. Of blades that will not cut. Of a man walking barefoot through coals." Ilarion's jaw twitched. "A man? They call him many things. But the oldest name is Intar." At that, the king moved to his throne, a great seat of black iron and redwood, with arms shaped like forged tongs. He sat, spine straight. "Summon the forged veteran. The one called Solon. Bring him now." The lift creaked. The guards flanked the old soldier as if he were a criminal. But Solon walked without fear, helm under arm, face blank. He bowed stiffly before the throne. Ilarion didn't rise. "You tested my weapons," the king said. "You served under my father. You led the Iron Host through 3 campaigns. Tell me now, is the forge cursed?" Solon paused. "No, Majesty. Not cursed. Changed." Ilarion's gaze sharpened. "Changed by whom?" Solon looked straight into the king's eyes. "Not by a man. Not by a rebel. By a memory. Woken in flame." The words hung like smoke in the air. Ilarion rose. "Then let them remember this," he said. "By noon tomorrow, the 6th furnace will be destroyed. All within it will burn. The forges will fear again." Far below, in a place where ceilings dripped and the walls whispered with heat, Mira slipped through the ash-covered gate of her father's old study. She hadn't returned here in years. Not since his death, sudden, quiet, suspicious. The books still smelled of smoke and ink. Dust clung to every corner like grief that refused to settle. She lit a small oil lamp and rummaged through the drawers. Then she found it. A journal, bound in red leather. On the first page, one line. "The god of fire does not leave. He waits." Her breath caught as she flipped through pages. Drawings of ancient furnace schematics. Notes about voices and flames. A name. Intar. Her fingers trembled. "He taught men to feed fire with wood, not blood." The journal read. "But they built swords instead of ovens. So he left." She closed the book. But the heat from its spine stayed in her hand. That night, in the low furnaces, Intar stood alone by the smoldering heart of the forge. Solon approached, slower this time. Respect in every step. "He knows," the soldier said. Intar didn't turn. "He fears what I am?" "No. He fears what you'll spark." Intar exhaled, and the embers rose with his breath. "I'm not a god anymore," he said. "Just a match tossed into a dry empire." Solon nodded. "Then they should pray you don't fall near powder." In the city, strange symbols began appearing, chalked onto alley walls, scratched into stall doors. A hand holding fire. The skin unburnt. Nobody knew who drew them. Nobody erased them. Back in the citadel, as Ilarion stood alone in the hall of flame, the 6th torch flickered once. A single spark rose from its blackened basin. The king narrowed his eyes. He turned away. But behind him, just for a breath, the unlit torch whispered. Not in words. In warmth. The square smelled of iron and expectation. They called it the Blackstone Plaza, a wide, polished expanse of dark basalt and smooth marble veins, ringed by banners of the crown. Normally, it was used for coronations, oaths, or shows of might. But today, the old furnace at its center had been cleared of dust, scrubbed, and restoked for a single purpose. Punishment. At dawn, the guards moved like smoke through the streets, herding citizens like livestock. Archers lined the rooftops. The plaza's edges filled with murmuring, wide-eyed faces, people who had never smelled execution, but now could taste the metallic breath of it. The furnace's mouth gaped like a skull. Cracked. Forgotten. Awakened. 3 slaves were led forward in chains, 2 old, resigned, and 1 boy. Thin, wide-eyed, muttering in his sleep the same name for days. Intar! The crowd was silent, but the word hung in the air like cold dust. High above, seated on his obsidian-draped platform, King Ilaren reclined on a throne shaped in flames. Behind him, torchlight curled along golden panels. His robes were red, his crown sharpened like spearheads. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. Below, Solon stood with his company of soldiers. His blade was already drawn, 1 foot from the furnace. His orders were simple: check the flame. Ensure it burns. But even before the fire sparked, he could feel it. It wasn't heat. Not yet. It was memory. Mira pressed through the crowd, heart pounding like a smith's hammer. In her sleeve, a folded slip of parchment, inked with the symbol of cold binding, an old ward her father once used to stabilize overheated cores. But as she looked up, she hesitated. Was this really to protect herself? Or him? The furnace was lit. But the flame didn't rise. It didn't curl, didn't hunger. Instead, it turned inward, drawing down, collapsing into a core silent and red, like a star preparing to be born. Ilaren stood. Here, he announced, voice cutting through the morning air like steel, is what awaits those who whisper false gods in their sleep, who believe warmth comes from faith, not from forged will. He raised one hand. The crowd held its breath. Then someone stepped forward. From the far edge of the plaza, a single figure walked into view. No armor. No robe. Barefoot. Intar. He moved like a breath before a storm. Not fast, but inevitable. His presence came first, then his steps. People shifted away, not in panic, but awe. The heat that came with him wasn't fire, it was choice. He stepped into the circle of guards. Nobody stopped him. He approached the furnace and laid a single hand on the blackened stone. You want a fire to frighten them, he said softly, to show them what happens to disobedience. But all I see is fear dressed as power. The flame flared. But it did not lash out. Instead, it rose, slow, steady, and changed. It did not climb the air. It stood. A figure of fire took shape behind Intar. Shoulders like smelted ore. A head crowned in flickering gold. Its hands open, not in wrath, but in witness. The crowd gasped. Some screamed. One guard dropped his sword. Another fell to his knees. One woman whispered prayers, not to Ilaren, but to the flame. Ilaren took 1 step back. Then another. Intar turned toward him. You built your kingdom from heat, he said, but you never understood its hunger. Fire doesn't serve. It chooses. The furnace cracked. Steam hissed from its seams. But no one burned. The fire faded. Not extinguished, fulfilled. And the furnace turned gray. Cold. Empty. Mira watched, breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled over the cold binding parchment. Then, slowly, she dropped it into the embers. Let go. The crowd said nothing. But their silence was no longer obedience. It was reverence. Ilaren raised his hand to order their deaths. But no one moved. Solon's sword hung loose. The soldiers didn't speak. The command had no air to ride on. In the distance, a girl wiped ash from her cheek. It shimmered. Not black, but silver. A beggar in the crowd whispered, voice cracking with age. I remember. My grandfather told me. Pits like this, they used to bless, not kill. Intar turned. Walked away. The crowd parted like wine through leaves. No longer from fear, but from respect. The city of Jerem held its breath. It had been 1 day since the fire had risen in the Blackstone Plaza. 1 day since a man had stepped into a furnace and emerged whole, shadowed by flame, unburnt, unbowed. The rumors had grown teeth. The name Intar was no longer whispered. It was carved into wood, scratched onto walls, traced into soot on windows. And so the king prepared his answer. Cauterize the wound. Ilarion had said to his captains, if the god nests in the heat, burn the nest. He ordered the iron quarter cleansed, where the city's oldest furnaces still groaned, where hammers struck in rhythm, where children carried sparks on their hands and ash in their lungs. By noon, the patrols moved like wolves, street by street, house by house. They knocked, then broke down doors. They searched under hearths, inside chimneys, even beneath forges. They claimed it was for weapons. They set fire to the homes anyway. And the flames grew. In the hidden depths beneath her father's workshop, Mira unfolded blueprints blackened by time. The diagrams were complex, circles within circles, ancient dwarven glyphs, and strange notations in her father's precise hand. This city's main forge. But the annotations were different. Not instructions for construction, transformation. Forged not for war, but for rebirth. She traced the lines. If she could redirect the city's pressure systems, force the flames downward, the heat could be harnessed, not weaponized. The forge could create again. Above, she heard shouting. Footsteps. Screams. She pressed her hand to the page and whispered, not yet. But soon. Solon walked with purpose now, not in chains of duty, but conviction. He had spoken to the smiths in secret. The tanners. The bricklayers. The boys who ran bellows and the girls who carried coals. We are not sparks. He had told them. We are embers. And embers become flame, if fed by truth. The streets were alive with tension. And then, with screams. The first house caught flame. Then another. The iron quarter lit like dry grass under lightning. But the fire was wrong. It curled against itself. Hesitated. And then began to retreat. Guards turned in confusion, seeing flames crawl away from doorways. From people. And then, from the smoke, he appeared. Intar. He walked from the heart of a blazing alley. Not running. Not hiding. His cloak burned from his shoulders and reformed as ash around his steps. His eyes glowed faintly, not with anger, but sorrow. Around him, the fire folded inward, bending at his will. Not consuming. Not saving. Waiting. The guards panicked. Some screamed. Others dropped weapons. A few fell to their knees. But one blade flashed in the smoke, and struck a boy. The youngest apprentice of the ironmaster. He died without a sound. Intar caught the boy's body before it hit the cobblestones. And something in him broke. He knelt. Held the child close. And when he stood, fire rose. Not as shape. Not as symbol. But as vengeance. I came to remind. He said, voice like cracking stone. Not to punish. He turned toward the nearest soldier, who dropped his sword and ran. But now, the flames lifted behind him, forming wings that didn't flap, only hovered, massive and trembling with power. Now you have burned your answer into flesh. The streets hissed. Stone cracked. But no walls fell. No one else died. And still, it was enough. Because all of Jerem saw the truth. The fire was awake. Mira watched from the shadows. She felt no heat. Only the tremble of choice. She saw Intar step forward, his body shaking not from exhaustion, but restraint. Don't lose yourself, she whispered. That night, a baker in the upper quarter found her oven lit, though she hadn't touched it. A blacksmith in the south found his forge breathing, without coals. And a mural appeared, painted in ash across the lower wall of the citadel. A hand holding fire, not as a weapon, but as a torch. Above it, glowing faintly in the dark, the words, "You cannot rule the flame, unless you burn." The air beneath the city carried a weight. The old workshop had been abandoned for decades, a stone skeleton once filled with sparks, now repurposed into shelter. The walls, stained by smoke, were draped with linen sheets to block drafts. Sooty lanterns swung low from iron hooks, casting golden light on tired faces. Tools lined the walls, not swords or spears, but chisels, spindles, bellows, baking stones. In the center of the room stood a single furnace. It was small, round, breathing with quiet embers, not violent flames. A child had called it the Living One. The name had stayed. It was night in Jerem. Above them, soldiers patrolled with heavy boots and heavier silence. But here, in the underground warmth, there were whispers. Hands clasped, knees brushed, eyes met. People sat in a loose circle, a weaver, her fingers raw from thread, a mason whose shoulders sagged like chipped statues, a boy who once ran messages for the palace guard, a woman who hadn't spoken since the fires. They all faced Intar. He didn't stand like a god. He stood like a man carrying something too bright to hide, too heavy to drop. The furnace glowed at his side, pulsing like a heartbeat. He spoke. Softly. I didn't come to burn you. His voice echoed in the stone, low and certain. I came to remind you, you are fire. Not ash. Not smoke. But flame. You were taught to fear that. Told to hide it. But fire doesn't live in silence. He looked around. I watched soldiers destroy homes. I saw fire used to erase names, not forge them. But fire isn't for death. He paused. Let the quiet settle. It's for making. A breath passed through the room, not exhaled, but released. He stepped forward. The king wants you buried beneath soot. But I say, it's time to burn, not with rage, but with purpose. Mira rose from the circle. She unrolled a tattered map of the city on the stone floor. Candlelight caught the faded ink. This is how they feed the palace furnaces, she said. Coal from the north tunnels. Air from the bellows under the market cistern. If we block this, she pointed, they'll choke. No violence. No blood. Just silence in the wrong place, and the great machine would stutter. Solon nodded. A forge without breath cannot burn. From the crowd, someone stood, an older man, a blacksmith's apprentice long past his prime. He placed the hammer on the stones. Not for war, he said. But I want it used. A baker followed. She brought bread still warm. Others came forward. A mason's chisel. A potter's bowl. A teacher's book of faded letters. One by one, pieces of their lives, not to destroy but to build. And then a child. The same boy who'd stoked the furnace last night. He stepped forward, face streaked with soot, and dropped a piece of wood into the glowing core. The flame caught, gently. It didn't roar. It breathed. Someone in the back raised their voice, hoarse with grief. They burn us. Why not burn them? A murmur rippled. Intar turned. If I burn with hate, he said, I become what built this city. Another voice growled. You talk like a man. But you're a god. Why not strike? Solon stood. His sword remained sheathed. I've fought wars, he said. I've seen men scream when they win, and cry when they survive. You want blood? He looked around. Then you've never buried someone you call brother. The room fell still. No orders. No fear. Just choice. Mira whispered to Intar as they sat beside the forge. You changed when the boy died. He nodded. I thought I could carry the flame without feeding it. But grief. His hands trembled. Grief adds coal. She laid a hand on his wrist. Then shape it. Don't let it shape you. Outside, rain touched the roofs of Jerem. But here, underground, it was warm. Not hot. Not wild. Warm. Together. Symbols began to appear in the tunnels. Charcoal drawings of hands not clenched, but open. Palms glowing with soft fire. Flames that lifted, not scorched. A woman with no name whispered. I've heard the gods shout. But you... She looked at Intar. You're the first one who speaks. The citadel of Jerem rose like a monolith above the smog-choked city, its dark towers pulsing with heat, each wall a breathing lung of stone and fire. Beneath it, the veins of the kingdom burned, tunnels that carried coal, wind, and steel into the heart of the empire. It was here that the fire power initiative had been born, a vision not of light, but of absolute control. And it was here, in the black marbled Hall of Flame, that King Alarin summoned his ministers. The throne was forged from slagstone and molten copper. Behind it, a mural glowed, flames licking skyward, crowned by a faceless figure holding a scepter of fire. It had once been symbolic. Now it was a warning. Alarin sat in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked no louder than the hiss of a forge. "Light every furnace," he said. "Smelt the copper. Ready the helmets. Sharpen the blades." A pause. Then, without lifting his eyes, "Dump the ash into the wells. No water for those who defy us." Some in the council stirred. One minister dropped his quill. Eremos, the king's old flame-tongued advisor, stepped forward. "Majesty, if we do this, they will not kneel. They will ignite." "They already have," Alarin murmured. "But I'll ensure they burn alone." Down in the veins of the city, another fire moved quietly. Mira crouched beside a metal grate behind a butcher's stall, unrolling a scroll of ancient maps. Her hands traced old vents and channels, memorizing. "Every forge breathes," she whispered, "and we will take their breath." Across the city, Solon stood in a forgotten smithy with 7 old blacksmiths. He laid a single map across a coal-stained table. "We seal these routes," he said. "We cut the arteries. The beast won't bleed. It will starve." One man hesitated. "And when it thrashes? Then we hold." That night, whispers spread faster than smoke. The coal sacks at Depot 7 were gone. Children with soot-smeared hands rerouted air ducts under the baker's square. Women poured water into barrels marked with an old rune, a silent sign: "This house breathes for the people." No alarms rang. But the king felt it. Something shifting. Not revolt. Withdrawal. And it scared him more. In a hidden forge, where the heat never died, Intar stood alone, staring at his hands. They pulsed gently, like coals beneath a hearth, not flames, not yet. Behind him, Mira entered. "You're ready," she said. He didn't answer. "They'll act soon," she continued. "The king won't wait." He turned. "I won't light the match," Intar said. "But I'll be there when the wind comes." She stepped closer, pulled a strip of red cloth from her bag, the same she found in her father's things. On it, the mark of a circle split by a single line. "This was once a seal of peace," she whispered. He took it, wrapped it around his wrist. "I'll make it a seal of presence." Solon walked through the merchant district, nodding silently to stall keepers, beggars, coal carriers. Every nod meant, ready. At the edge of the quarter, he knelt and lit a single coal bag. The fire rose only a hand's width, small, but visible. It was not a flame of war. It was a signal. Atop the citadel, Alarin stood with his new sword, forged from an experimental alloy, blacker than obsidian. The blade didn't shine. It devoured light. "Let them come," he said to no one. He looked down at his kingdom. A city pulsing with heat. A people stealing fire. "They want flame?" he whispered. "Then I'll give them ash." But they had already chosen. In the alleys, smiths cooled their forges. In the kitchens, ovens lay dark. In the temples, candles remained unlit. The people had taken the one thing no fire could survive without: oxygen. At midnight, a voice whispered across the inner walls of the citadel. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted. It was heard. Intar's voice. Not from a rooftop. Not through magic. But through the mouths of the people. One by one. Door by door. House by house. If they burn to destroy. A pause. We will burn to illuminate. And then. But only together. The heart of the Empire did not beat like a drum. It pulsed like fire. Deep beneath the marble throne of King Alarin, where no sunlight had ever reached, lay the oldest and most secret chamber of Garum, the Foundry Heart, a vast furnace buried into the stone of the earth, forged by ancient hands for a purpose long forgotten. The records called it the last forge, designed to be lit only once, to birth a weapon for a war that never came. But on this night, the heart awoke on its own. No one had touched it. No coal had been fed. No air had been pumped. And yet the ancient furnace groaned, then growled, then roared, a low, rolling heat that crept upward through the stone foundations of the citadel. King Ilarion sat on his throne, high above the city, still wrapped in shadows despite the moonless sky. But he felt it. A tremor, then warmth, then the unmistakable rise of heat beneath him. He rose slowly, clenched the pommel of his black steel blade, and turned to his guard captain. "Open the vault," he commanded. "If the heart dares burn, I will meet it myself." Below, in the echoing chambers of the city's underbelly, Mira crouched behind rusted ventilation grates, her fingers tracing the blueprints she had inherited from her father. They led her to the old control levers of the citadel's airflow system, hidden, forgotten. If the heart exploded, the entire palace would burn. But if she opened the vents just right, the fire could rise harmlessly, seen but not felt, heard but not feared. Her breath trembled. She heard whispers in the flame. Not voices, memories. Names. Faces. The thousands who had died to keep this fire buried. "Not again," she whispered. "Not for him." And she turned the first valve. In the streets above, Salon and a handful of smiths held the main gates. Not with weapons, but with presence. No guards left. No soldiers panicked. The city held its breath. The stars did not return to the sky. The silence deepened. Beneath the throne, Ilarion entered the chamber of the heart. The forge had no firewood, no bellows. But it burned. The walls shimmered red. Metal had liquefied in the troughs. And from the center of the molten glow, something took form, not a weapon, not a beast, but a man. A man of quiet fire, of steady breath. A man the king recognized, though he had never truly seen him. "Intar." Ilarion spat, voice cracking. "Pretender. You think fire will bend me?" Intar stepped forward, barefoot across the stone, unfazed by the blistering heat. "I came not to bend," he said. "Only to speak. One last time." "You'll die here," Ilarion said. "And your followers with you." "No," Intar replied. "They will live. Because I choose not to burn them. I choose to burn this." And he reached into the heart. Not to unleash it, but to absorb it. In the city above, smoke rose through the grates. But it was not black. It was golden. Soft. Like threads of a memory long buried. It curled around rooftops and towers and drifted across the silent city like a forgotten song. Children stepped outside. Old women looked up. For the first time in decades, the flames from the citadel were not a threat, but a beacon. Ilarion screamed. His sword, forged in secret, meant to destroy anything divine, melted in his grip. Droplets of iron struck the ground and hissed like dying lies. Intar stood in the heart of the fire. "You built your rule on this forge," he said softly. "But you never asked what it cost. Now I show you. You're nothing." Ilarion hissed. "You're not a god." "No," said Intar. "I'm a man. But I remember what the fire was before you chained it." And with that, the heart ceased. Not with an explosion, but with a breath. The flames flickered, and then drew inward, collapsing into Intar's chest. He staggered once, then stood taller. The forge darkened. The stone cooled. King Ilarion, breathless, fell to his knees. Intar looked down, not with hate, but with sorrow. "If you'd stepped away from your throne," he murmured, "you might have lived long enough to rebuild." And then he turned and left the chamber. When he emerged, the people were already gathered. They did not cheer. They did not bow. They simply watched. Because they knew. The city still stood. But the forge of tyranny had gone out. And the only fire left was theirs. The city of Garum no longer smelled of ash and blood. Now it smelled of dust, iron, and something unfamiliar, stillness. The forge fires had gone out days ago, but their warmth remained. Not in the bricks, nor in the coals, but in the people. No banners flew from the citadel. No horns sounded. No orders barked from balconies. The throne sat empty. The heart was cold. And yet, something new had begun to breathe. It was not silence, not truly. It was the sound of footsteps with nowhere to run, of doors opening instead of slamming shut, of hands brushing off not to fight, but to shape. Mira stood on the steps of the old quarter, overlooking the square that had once been soaked with fear. She held in her hand a worn piece of parchment, a page from her father's journal, found tucked in the folds of a forgotten book. On it, only one line. The world is not made by the sword, but by the ember that survives the dark. She didn't speak aloud. She didn't need to. Below, people were moving. A boy pushed a cart of water jars down the hill. A one-handed smith stitched a leather apron. A baker brought out a tray of burnt loaves, smiling through the smoke. And beside the fountain, Salon sat cross-legged, surrounded by children, showing them how to carve wood not into spears, but spoons. Start with the handle, he told the girl with blackened fingers. That's where you hold on. Same as with a choice. In the marketplace, a pair of guards returned, hesitant, helmets in hand. They expected rocks, spit, revenge. Instead, a woman handed them bread. Stay or go, she said. But we won't be what you remember. They stood there a long time, unsure whether to cry or kneel. They called it the gathering, though no one planned it. The people of Garum came to the square not with shouts or banners, but in stillness. Some stood. Some sat. All breathed the same air. Not for war. Not for gods. For each other. An old potter, his hands scarred by years of mold and fire, stepped forward. He held a small clay bowl. Nothing fancy. Uneven at the lip. I made weapons, he said. For 30 years, I shaped things to kill. But today, I remembered how to make something that holds. And he placed the bowl on the old stone where the king once spoke. Mira turned to the crowd. Not as a leader. She had never asked to be one. But she knew how to speak when it mattered. We stayed, she said. We were not chosen. We chose. And that is the fire that will not go out. They did not cheer. They simply stood together like embers scattered, but still glowing. And then, he came. Not from the sky. Not in a pillar of flame. From the north, walking barefoot down the ash-lined road, with dust on his face and a hammer in his hand. Intar. His cloak was torn. His hair grown. But his eyes were the same. Quiet. Unyielding. Not like a god returning. Like a man who had never left. Mira stepped forward, her throat caught between joy and questions. You said you were done? I said, Intar replied, that I wouldn't lead. But you returned, said Salon, rising from the circle of children. Intar nodded, resting the hammer on the central stone. I returned, he said, to remind you that you never needed me to begin with. A murmur passed through the crowd. A few stepped forward, reaching out, not to worship, but to understand. One man asked, Will you stay? Intar looked at the forge behind them, now cold. I'll walk, he said. I'll watch. But I won't rule. No god should. Not again. A girl raised her hand. But what if we forget? He knelt to her height. Then the fire, he whispered, will remind you. They did not call him king. They did not beg him to stay. But where he placed the hammer, a circle began to form, not of ash, but of stone, clay, and hands. They called it the circle of work, a place where tools would be made, stories told, and no one would be turned away. The road beyond Garum was lined with ash and silence, yet the silence did not feel dead. It was the breath drawn before words, before music, before fire. Intar walked that road. Not as a god. Not even as a legend. Just a man with calloused hands, a soot-streaked shirt, and eyes where fire no longer raged, but lived. Each village he passed bore signs of a world between ruin and rebirth. A forge converted into a communal kitchen. A rusted helmet repurposed as a grain scoop. Murals on walls, children's hands cradling flames, not swords. In a highland hamlet with only 2 wells and no name, Intar paused. He smelled smoke, clean, pine-scented, not acrid, and followed it. A girl, maybe 7, crouched beside a ring of stones. She struck 2 flints with slow precision. Spark. Flame. She shielded it with her hands until it caught the kindling. Intar stepped closer. Who taught you that? The girl turned her soot-speckled face toward him. Grandma said fire listens if you don't shout at it. He knelt, watching the flames flicker. She was right. And for the first time in days he smiled. Back in Garum, the city had not waited for its fire-bearer. Mira stood in what had once been a weapons workshop. The soot had been scrubbed from the walls, replaced by shelves of tools, copper molds, fireproof gloves sized for children. She called it the School of Flame. Not to control fire. To understand it. There was no statue of Intar. Only a single object at the center of the main hall, a small clay bowl, baked in fire and marked only by the soot from the palm that made it. No inscription. Just utility. Mira told every student who asked. He left that not as a symbol, but as proof that gods, too, can shape useful things. At dusk, Intar returned to Garum. He passed through the gate no one guarded, down streets where children played barefoot without fear. Mira met him by the river. She was older now, or perhaps just standing straighter. You came back, she said. Just for tonight. They sat by the water, watching reflections of lamplight ripple across the current. No one's spoken your name in days, Mira said. That's good, Intar replied. If they forget me, they'll stop waiting for me. That's the only way they'll learn to carry the flame on their own. You're afraid they'll remember? I'm afraid they won't stop remembering. Mira exhaled, slow. We've started. The children, they don't know fear. Only warmth. That's the only kind of fire worth leaving behind, he said. Later that night, Mira found a hammer on the anvil in the workshop. Not her father's. Not one of theirs. New but worn. Her name was carved into the handle, not proudly, but like a whisper. For shaping, not for striking. No one saw Intar leave. He didn't need to be seen. The flame had already taken root. Out in the villages, people still debated. Should we name a new king? Should Intar return? But no one forced answers. They planted gardens, dug canals, turned plowshares from spears, just like the old stories said they would, except no one needed the story anymore. In a lowland town, a retired soldier melted down the blade he had once used in war. From it, he made 3 pruning hooks. Gave them to 3 children. They didn't ask where the metal came from. They only asked, "Can we plant together?" Intar kept walking. Not to be found, but to witness. In one place, he saw a woman teaching fire starting with her bare hands. In another, a man wrote a poem and left it on a bench. I met a flame once. It didn't burn. It warmed me until I remembered how to begin. And one evening, far from cities and names, a child asked him, "Are you the fireman?" Intar smiled. Not anymore. The fire did not end. It stepped back, so that others could step forward. And in every hand that held warmth, in every tool shaped in peace, in every child who lit a flame and whispered to it instead of fearing it, Intar lived. Not as god, not as legend, but as ember. Waiting. The hills rolled like sleeping giants beneath a sky too wide to measure. Somewhere beyond them, maps ended. Roads stopped being roads and became mere trails left by deer, by wind, by time. And here, where no name had ever settled, a small clay house stood alone. Smoke rose from it, thin, gray, honest. Not the smoke of war. Not the thick breath of a forge. It smelled of pine, earth, and bread. Each morning, before the mist lifted, a man stepped outside the door. His beard was silver, his eyes dark with a warmth that once could have burned a city. His name, no longer spoken loudly, was once the prayer of rebels and the curse of kings. He was called Intar. But now, he was just a man in a home with no walls around his past. That morning, he walked barefoot over damp grass, climbed a low hill, and stood still, listening. Not for danger. Not for gods. Just the wind. Just birds. Behind him, the low door creaked. A boy, no more than 10, approached cautiously, arms wrapped around his thin chest. "They say you were fire once," the boy said. Intar didn't turn. "And what do you think?" "I don't know," the boy replied, eyes fixed on the sky. "But you never seem cold." Intar smiled. He crouched and drew a line in the dirt. "What is this?" "A line." "No," Intar said. "It's a spark. Watch." He dragged his finger, and the line curved, rose, split into 3. "Now it's flame." The boy stared. "Can anyone be fire?" "Yes," Intar said. "But fire that cooks, not burns. Fire that lights, not blinds. The choice is yours." The boy nodded slowly. "I brought this." From his bag, he took a lump of clay, misshapen but warm in his hand. "They're teaching us now." "At the school?" "Good," Intar said. "Keep it soft. Shape it with clean hands. Never with anger." The boy looked up. "Will you come back?" "I never left," Intar replied. "But I won't stay forever." That night, after the boy returned to the village, Intar sat beside the hearth. A single ember glowed in the ashes, the last of the day's fire. He held it gently between tongs and placed it in a shallow clay bowl he had shaped years ago. A gift once. A reminder. He opened the door, placed the bowl on the step, and stood for a while in silence. No banners flew over the house. No guards waited. Just night and stars and the sound of the world exhaling. Then he walked, away from the house, from the village, from the stories. Into trees. Into wind. Into what was next. By morning, the bowl was still there. Inside it, the coal had not gone cold. And beside it, sprouted from a crack in the earth, was a tiny green shoot. A plant. A life. In Garum, far away, the school of fire grew brick by brick. Children recited no oaths. They sang no hymns. But they worked, with hands blackened by ash and hearts no longer afraid of heat. Mira still wore her scarf tied like her father once did. She lit no fires she couldn't hold with her own palms. And when people asked if she still heard from him, she'd answer with a smile. "We don't wait for him. We build from him." Some said he died. Others said he walked west until the sun swallowed him. Some said they saw a traveler by the edge of the river, with a warmth in his eyes that made wolves lower their heads. But none knew for certain. Only the boy, now older, returned each year to the house on the hill, where the clay never cracked, where the wind didn't howl. And each year, he lit a small fire, sat beside it, and whispered, "You were fire. You were man. You were both. And now you are home."